Well, what you see in advanced industrial countries is that when you have asset bubbles, when the prices of houses or stocks become unsustainable, and then people suddenly realize that they're over indebted, and then they stop spending. At that point, a couple of things happen that create a snowballing effect crisis in the economy. Consumers stop spending because they want to pay down their, what they now consider to be excessive debts. They didn't yesterday, but today they do. And at the same time, there's a general financial panic because without the repayment of those debts, all of those debts are someone else's assets in the financial system. And the creditors don't know what they're worth, literally. At that point, the entire system is contaminated and everyone realizes that there are these toxic debts that may never be repaid. It's generally a rule of thumb that in that case, and I think most progressive as well as conservative economists agree on that, it does make sense in one way or another for the government to socialize the toxic debts in order to allow both households to return to consuming more, and consumption is what drives an advanced economy for the most part, but also to get them out of the financial system so that it's not clogged up by kind of arteriosclerosis of the veins and arteries of finance. So that's not controversial. What was controversial was in the United States, this was not accompanied by measures beyond rescuing the financial community. Two in particular. There was a lot of pressure early in the crisis to restructure household mortgage debt. Since you have something like a quarter of Americans underwater on their mortgages, meaning that because of the collapse of housing prices, they owe more on their mortgages than the house could actually be sold for, a situation which, among other things, depresses consumption. Because if you have people defaulting or being forced out of their homes, then that just drives down spending by consumers even more. The other measure that could have been taken was to bail out state and local governments, which are very important in a federal system like the United States. So there could have been a plan in which you did temporarily bail out the banks one way or another. You can quibble about how you do it and the details of it, but that was probably necessary. But you could also have had the government socialize part of the losses in the residential real estate market, and also socialize some of the spending of the state and local governments, which by peculiarity of American politics mostly have balanced budget amendments, except for bond-financed municipal improvements like roads and schools. Most states cannot spend more than they take in. And when revenues collapse during a crisis like the Great Recession, they're forced to radically cut back spending, even though that then throws people out of work. Wages collapse, people stop spending. It just makes things worse in this spiral of downward deflation of wages and prices. So what happened in the United States was there was a bailout of the banks. There was no bailout of homeowners, and there was no bailout of state and local governments. And the latter is particularly troubling because a number of economists looking at the data have suggested that the effects of the federal stimulus, which did have some positive effects in restoring aggregate demand, which had cratered because of consumer spending cutbacks. A lot of people think the effects of the federal stimulus were neutralized by state and local cutbacks. So even as the federal government was expanding the economy somewhat through investment in infrastructure, through public works, through extending unemployment insurance at the state level, states, counties, and cities were firing people, laying off teachers, policemen, ending road projects. So the two levels of government were working against each other simultaneously. I think that's a stronger criticism, that the bailouts did not go far enough, rather than saying there should have been no bailout of the financial system at all. If that had occurred, then probably the Great Recession would have turned into a second Great Depression.